Hello, my name is Daniel Sweetser, and this morning I'm reading from my novel Hope Starts Small, and I'm going to be reading the beginning of chapter 9 called The Field, and this is chapter 9 part 1, Tarps. Eventually it was time to begin to prepare the field. Frank had originally intended to plant the blueberries in the field early in the spring, but through the kind advice of a friend, Frank's plan changed and his timeline extended. This meant he would have to deal with the grass, which before would have been irrelevant. To deal with the grass and weeds, Frank decided to solarize the field. This meant purchasing a large clear tarp, laying it on the ground, and letting the sun cook the plants underneath over time. Frank found out that the home improvement store had cheap painter's tarps that were the right size at an excellent price. He got one, and a friend helped him set it up and weigh it down with old barn wood and railroad ties that were left behind by the former owner. Frank was not inclined to purchase more tarps if he could help it, and so he planned that every few weeks, when everything was clearly dead, he would move the tarp over a little at a time and let it kill a new section of the field. There were going to be roughly 5 sections total that would need to be cleared. The first took the longest, as it was still early in the summer, and so it took a while for the sun to do its work properly. Then, at a certain point, Frank decided it was time, and when his parents were visiting, they helped him move the tarp to the next section. What was left behind was a golden yellow strip of the field, well crisped and beginning to decompose. It was lovely to Frank, like a clean new sheet of paper ready to be drawn on. The next section cooked more quickly, although Frank discovered that he needed to move the weight-bearing beams slightly over time, or else there would be an odd strip of protected grass that made it through the process. A couple weeks later, he moved the tarp to the third section. Over time, though, Frank began to see that the areas he had already addressed were beginning to grow. As the summer stretched on, he decided to prioritize getting the first couple sections truly clear. He tried weeding the deeply rooted survivors, things like thistles, small trees, and dandelions, by hand, but eventually he just moved the tarp back over. What he found in the process was that as soon as he moved the tarp away from the section, it began to quickly recover. By the time he was ready to finalize the field for the plants, you couldn't quite tell that the third section had ever been solarized at all, and the first and second sections were already trying to stage a comeback. A friend from church had visited with his family, and when he was there, he mentioned that using a rototiller could clear that field pretty quickly. At the time, Frank had said he was against it because he was ascribing to a sort of no-till philosophy. No-till, as best he understood it, said that the soil was its own ecosystem, and to till it would be to fundamentally disrupt a living system that ideally should be left alone to contribute to whatever is planted. The living soil feeds the plant, and in return the plant feeds the living soil. The irony was that much later on, after the blueberries had been planted, Frank continued to struggle with weeds, and discovered that the only effective way to deal with them was to shear off the first 4 inches of topsoil in the walkways. It was a bit hypocritical of him to land here, but it was the pragmatic solution, and for what it was worth, the rows themselves, where the blueberries would be planted, were left alone, like little horizontal islands surrounded by barren wilderness. At one point, Frank tried to move the tarp one last time, and in the process it tore to bits and was ruined. Frank was not in a good mood that day. He remembered being cranky with the kids. He had to sit and think, and eventually he concluded that the death of the tarp was fine, because he had been trying to work a part of the field that he didn't even have enough plants to use yet. He wadded up the shredded tarp and set it to the side for a while, and then eventually hauled it forward to the street for the trash truck. He put as much of it into the can as he could, but there was probably 40 pounds of tarp left hanging off the side. He looked out while Waste Management loaded it and felt remarkably guilty for having stuck the guy with his mess. Frank determined then that he would do what he could to avoid generating quite so much garbage in the future, even if it meant abandoning plastic tarps altogether. All right, thank you for listening. I hope you have a great day.